people in this room have seen a movie in the last week? Okay, awesome. Well, CNN has reported that Netflix, one of the most popular streaming services for movies and television, has over 139 million subscribers, all of whom can stream hundreds of movies of their choosing at any time. Film is part of our culture. And film is a giant art form that encompasses many other smaller art forms with it, between the choreography, the costuming, the hair and makeup, even the cinematography. One key element and art form in this is film music, which has its own separate history outside of the music itself. Today I intend to show you how film music has progressed along with the progression of the history of film itself. So, the first films are actually developed without sound. Sarah Pruitt's History.com article explains that the Lumiere brothers were the pioneers of the movie. They developed a technology that recorded images and was able to project them back, what they called as film cinemas. They actually recorded several of these films for themselves, made their own. After this, films are being shown in theaters across the country, and with this, there was a rise in theater musicians playing music along with the movies. Richard Davis, in his book, The Complete Guide to Film Scoring, theorizes that the rise in popularity of these theater musicians was actually a practical way to mask the sound of the loud theater projector in the room. Because of the popularity of theater musicians, film studios wanted to standardize the songs being played during their movies, so they created what they called musical fake books, and it had a bunch of songs to be played during a bunch of scenes in movies. They had several sad songs to be played during the sad scenes, several epic songs to be played for their more triumphant scenes. Every song was categorized by genre. That way the film musician would even often on the spot pick a song that was appropriate for the scene that was being played. As film technology progressed, we introduced the sound film, also known as talkies. Yeah. The first talkies date back to 1894 as Mark Wanamaker, a famous Hollywood historian as well as film consultant, explains it was Alice Guy Blanche, the first female director, who used very expensive technology to create her sound films and made several of them herself. Because this technology was so expensive, it didn't even get popular until 30 years afterwards. But in that 30 years, we had the golden age of movie musicals. So sound was very important to these movies. Musicians had to use orchestras on set. Studios were hiring composers to make music specifically for their films. And the orchestras on set actually had to perform their music while the actors were shooting their scenes. Everything was all done together. Meaning, with all those moving pieces, if one thing went wrong, you had to start everything all over again. This also meant that the musicians that were playing in the orchestras were there for the entire production. Theater musicians were also out of a job at this point because there wasn't a need. Sound films were so popular, they were creating their own sound for them. Lots of jobs lost. Later, movies began a new technology, which was the re-record technology. Because of this, movies could record the sound separately if they wanted to, and then edit them into the movie later. This definitely helped with the orchestras because instead of orchestras being a part of the whole entire production, musicians were only hired for 3 weeks. The composer was commissioned to write the song, and in the 3 weeks, all the orchestra musicians would learn the piece and record it. This made editing so much easier because they could cut out a section of dialogue without ruining the music that they had already recorded. In The Invisible Art of Film Score by Lawrence MacDonald, he tells us that in 1934, the Academy Awards commissioned 2 more award categories, Best Song and Best Score. So we can see that also film scores were gaining more respect in the film community. So in our modern era of film, we know that it's all about money. You have your summer blockbuster, you have your highest grossing film. Recently, Avengers Endgame topped out as one of the highest grossing film, over $1 billion in a weekend. It's not just the movies that can make money. Studios are realizing that the film scores and soundtracks can make money as well. So they started selling them separately. And while an orchestrated film score can be very successful, think the score to the Star Wars franchise, or anything John Williams has written really. But the studios did realize that a song that people can remember and sing along to would make them more money, which is why they would commission famous artists or bands such as the Beatles to write songs specifically for their movies. The Billboard charts says that the highest grossing soundtrack of all time is The Bodyguard, thanks in part to Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You. The soundtrack has sold 12.1 million copies and is actually the 6th most best-selling album of all time. Another thing that they have done is the soundtracks have played on nostalgia and become a big part of pop cultures. If you have a movie that's set in the 80s or a television series, a popular one from our time would be Stranger Things. The best way to incite the feelings of nostalgia would to have a score that reminisces the scores of the 70s, or to have music that directly was popular in the 80s and the 70s. And that's another way people have been making money. So as you can see, as the history of film has progressed, so has the history of film music, creating a different art form completely separate of music itself. I challenge you to think to yourself, the next time you hear the Imperial March, can you hear that song and not think about Star Wars? Thank you.